We're so excited that you're here for Dietitian Dream Jobs, Eating Disorder Specialist from Patient Care to Professional Speaker and Beyond. I'm Emily, Chief Marketing Officer at All Access Dietetics. And we have a very special guest here today, and I'm so excited to have you all here to learn from our incredible guest, Jessica Setnick, registered dietitian and founder of Eating Disorders Bootcamp. So today you'll be learning about Jessica's career as an eating disorder specialist, from patient care to private practice to public speaking and everything else that she's involved with and that she's done in her career. And we will also have some time for Q&As at the end. So you should be able to drop those questions in the chat. We'll be looking through them and we'll take a couple of them at the end. And you'll also receive a replay of the event tomorrow, so you can go back and watch anything. I know some people may be driving or at lunch or taking the break from their job right now. So we definitely appreciate you being here. And you'll also get some more resources again from Jessica. So I'll start off with introducing Jessica a little bit. So Jessica has one of the most recognizable names in the eating disorder nutrition world, thanks to decades in the field and hundreds of presentations and books. Her signature workshop, Eating Disorders Bootcamp, was the first to recognize that all dietitians need a working knowledge of eating disorders, regardless of their practice area, and to encourage dietitians to lead the eating disorder care team. 2 decades later, thousands of dietitians worldwide have taken Eating Disorders Bootcamp in person and online. And if you're a dietitian or soon-to-be RD, which we know a lot of you are both of those, Jessica Setnick is your biggest fan. She knows the world will be a better place when more dietitians take the stage to present, and her goal is to prepare you for the role of educator, public speaker, and guide for those who need your message. And we cannot wait for you to hear what Jessica has to say, but first I'm going to highlight that she has an amazing offer just for our community. So Eating Disorders Bootcamp is already an incredible value, but we do have a limited time discount that you can use code ALLACCESS at checkout for an extra 40% off, or $40 off. I'm going to drop that in the chat.
Thanks for mentioning that.
Yes. And I'm super excited for everyone to check it out. Let me just put that in the chat here. Okay, so this link that just dropped in the chat, that's the Eating Disorders Bootcamp. Let me make sure everyone can see
Well,
that.
it's pretty easy because it's just eatingdisordersbootcamp.com.
And then there is, so like I said, there's a pricing for dietitians or students. And then the code that you can use for $40 off is All Access. And this next link that I'm dropping in is that direct product page. So definitely make sure to check out both of those. And just want to make sure, can people see that in the chat?
I don't have my chat on, but I can tell you that if you go to eatingdisordersbootcamp.com, you can also listen to, a D just popped up on my screen. You can listen to the first module of Eating Disorders Bootcamp at no charge.
Oh, and it looks like, okay, so that just went in the chat there, and no, people didn't see it before. So that first link is the Eating Disorders Bootcamp homepage. Definitely check that out, read about it. It's a really, really incredible self-paced course and has a lot of great resources. And then the code is All Access for $40 off, whether you're a dietitian or a student. And the next link is that direct product page. And then also, we know you're going to learn so much from Jessica and be so inspired today. So if you want to be the first to know about any of her other upcoming events, free trainings, and giveaways, I'm going to drop the link that you can subscribe to for email updates in the chat. And then, of course, we always like to stay in touch on social and LinkedIn. So I'll also drop for Instagram and LinkedIn. And then Jessica, wanted to pass it to you if you had anything else you wanted to share. I know we're going to get into a lot of things during our conversation.
No, I'm just so excited. We need more dietitians in the eating disorder field. So I'm really happy we have such a great turnout today. I'm hoping I can inspire everyone listening to pursue eating disorders in a specialty area.
Fantastic. All right, I'm going to spotlight both of us so that they can see us. All right. We are spotlighted. All right, and we know some of you here, you may have submitted a question if you're someone here. We had some great questions, so we are covering those today too. But like I said, if you joined a little later, drop questions in the chat. We'll be doing questions at the end during Q&A. All right, so to start off, how did this all get started?
Sure. So when I was thinking about this question, I realized that I'm going to sound really, really old when I answer it, and I'm okay with that. But it was the dawn of the internet. And if you don't remember that era, if you've always grown up with the internet, let me just tell you that before the internet, you literally had to look in a book in your dietitian office to find the answer to something. And if you didn't know the answer to something, you had to find another dietitian who could answer it. And to do that, you had to call information. And let's just say that you were a dietitian in Houston. You would call information and you would say, could you please give me the phone number for a hospital in Dallas? And you'd call that number. And then you'd say to whoever answered the phone, could I speak with the nutrition department? And then whoever answered that phone, you would say, do you have an eating disorder dietitian or someone I could talk to about eating disorders? And they would say, no, we don't have that. So you'd hang up the phone and then you'd call information again. Could I have the phone number for a different hospital in Dallas? And then you'd go through that same process. And hopefully, eventually, you would find a dietitian who could answer your question. But that's literally how it went when I very first became a dietitian. And so pretty early on, the academy, but it was called ADA back then, they started a listserv, one message board for all dietitians. And so this changed literally everything, because instead of that whole process that I just described, you could wake up in the morning. You could go to work in the morning. You could see that there's a patient with an eating disorder on your census. You could freak out and then just type on the listserv, hey, I have a patient with anorexia on my census. Can someone please help me? And by the time you got back from your floor and you were sitting down to check your email again at lunchtime, you would then see immediately someone like me had said, hey, give me a call. Here's my number. I can help. Or had typed an answer to your question. And so this was completely revolutionary at that time. And so I was thinking about it and I was like, oh my God, I was the equivalent of a social media influencer back then, because I was totally into it. Eating disorders was like my jam. The only thing I really felt like I had a great grasp on with nutrition, it was like my thing, right? And so I would answer all these questions. And so then people would know they could contact me. And then they started asking me to give presentations. And that's how I became known as someone who knew about eating disorders. And I just felt like I look back and I think that was probably how it all really got started, was because I would answer people's questions online.
That's amazing. And I feel like so many people who read those questions during that time with you when that was all developing are, I'm sure, so thankful for your help then. And it's an interesting parallel to today's world and how we all share information as dietitians. And there's multiple places now, but it's fantastic that you were able to have that guidance.
Yeah, and I think that that's where my first sort of vibe as a dietitian, that we should all be sharing information and we shouldn't be gatekeepers and we aren't in competition. I think that's where it all started, because it just seems so obvious that there are dietitians all around the country and we all had the same lack of education about eating disorders. So if someone had figured something out on their own, or let's say they had a great therapist they were working with, or for me, I had the best of the best child psychiatrists that I was learning from in the hospital, that why wouldn't we share that information with other people? And so I feel like that sort of set the tone in a way for the eating disorder dietitian field.
Yes. Amazing. That's a really great story. And I feel like a lot of the younger students who are here, it's probably so interesting for them to hear that too, because just not knowing what it was like before when you were calling hospitals, and how that all works. It's a great story.
It was a mess. Yeah.
So on the topic of like first starting out and when you were starting counseling clients and patients, something that we hear a lot from our dietitians and students who are in those like counseling rotations is that they are obviously nervous. There's a lot of imposter syndrome. So did you feel nervous or get that imposter syndrome? And if you did, how did you overcome that?
Okay, first of all, of course I did. Second of all, I still get imposter syndrome. And third, yes, it's really easy to overcome because it's just nerves. And if you just realize that kind of the same way we would teach our patients, feelings aren't facts. Just because you feel scared of that banana doesn't mean the banana is actually scary, right? Just because you feel like an imposter doesn't mean you are an imposter. But it's just feelings, it's chemistry. And absolutely, before I give presentations, I still feel like, well, why would they want to hear me? Before I submit a proposal to speak, I think, well, why would they want to pick me? I mean, it's just part of the process of stretching yourself, I think. And if you always do things that you're comfortable with, then you're not stretching. So if you ever want to grow, you're going to have to experience imposter syndrome. So the key to me is to just know that it's a feeling, and it probably has a lot to do with society and the way we're raised and the way we're schooled and the fact that we're always taking tests when we're in school and we always feel like we have to get the right answer. And the best way to overcome imposter syndrome for me was to recognize that it is okay to say, I don't know. And so if you're in school and you take a test or the RD exam, let's say, and you don't know the answer to a question, you can't write that. You can't write, let me consult with some classmates and get back to you. Or you know what, I'm gonna ask around and then I'll answer this question next week. Right. But in the real world, absolutely you can. You can be giving a presentation and you can say, that's an interesting point of view I hadn't thought of. I don't know the answer. Or you can be with a client and you can say, that's not my area of expertise, but I can try to find out. Right. So once you know that I don't know is an acceptable answer in the real world, then you lose that perfectionist feeling of, I can't go on that stage until I know all the answers. I can't counsel a patient until I know all the answers. That day's never going to happen. So instead, you just are aware. And yes, granted, you don't want to say, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know to everything, but I have a feeling you know a lot of things. And one of the things that I realized pretty early on was that there are situations where you imagine in your head what someone's going to ask a dietitian, and then you actually go into the real world and you realize people are asking really basic questions. And I'm just thinking of the time when I stopped doing eating disorders boot camp live for a while, and then I went back to it, and I thought, this a few years had gone by, maybe I haven't kept up with everything. Like, what if people ask me questions about the microbiome or something that I don't know the answer to? And I just told myself, well, then you just say, I don't know the answer to that. I'm sure there's a course on that. This is what I do know about. And then when I got out to my first eating disorders boot camp in the second round, the first question someone asked me was, they said, I work at a university. Is it okay with me to talk to my patients' counselors? And I thought, oh, well, this is eating disorder boot camp. This is what I do. Right. So I had made up in my head that people would be asking me all these complicated questions, but nobody comes to eating disorders boot camp to ask about the microbiome. They go somewhere else for that. So I was perfectly competent to answer the questions that people were asking, and also prepared to say, I don't know, that's not my area, or I haven't kept up with that, but I can ask around and see where you could find out about that. Those are the things that have really freed me from imposter syndrome. Not that I don't get it. I think that's normal to get it. It's just that not letting it paralyze you, not letting it feel like proof that you really can't do whatever it is that you're setting out to do. Because just because someone else hasn't done it yet, or just because someone else rained on your parade and said you shouldn't be able to do it, that doesn't mean anything. Look at all the people out there who have no credentials that are doing the things that you want to do, etc. So, if they have imposter syndrome, they're obviously getting over it even better than you. So I guess my bottom line is, yes, imposter syndrome, normal, but not real.
Yes, I love that. And I love all the stories that you had behind that. I think people can relate to that in different ways that are listening, whether you're a student counseling a patient, whether it's like an outpatient center, or even in the hospital where you're quickly talking to patients. Your
Well, I
tip.
don't remember anyone ever telling me it's okay to say you don't know. I don't remember that at all. I remember the first time in the hospital that I was covering the whole hospital on the weekend. They would give us the hospital pager, and you would stay in the hospital all weekend, and you would have to answer every question on every floor. And like I said, eating disorders was my strength. And I also worked in the endocrine clinic. But everything else, I had no idea. General peds, no clue. And so I got a consult from a resident, and it said, we're tube feeding a baby. How much free water do they need? We're tube feeding breast milk. So how much water do they also need? And I couldn't find it in any books, and it was the weekend. So, you could put something out on the list, or no one was going to answer you on the weekend. So I called one of the dietitians at home. And to me, these were like the most premier child nutrition experts in all of North Texas. And I couldn't believe I was calling one at home on a weekend to ask what I was sure was an idiotic question. And I said, I'm sure I should know this, but I just can't find it anywhere in any of our books. But how much water do they have to put in the tube for this breast milk tube fed baby? And the dietitian said, Jessica, breastfed babies don't need water. It doesn't matter if it's coming from a boob or the tube, there's no water needed. And I thought, oh my gosh, that just proves it. Just because someone asks a question doesn't mean there's an answer to it, right? And here I was feeling like a total failure because I didn't know the answer to what surely was a very simple question. And this dietitian was totally happy to answer my question. It took her 1 minute out of her weekend. And so I learned from that it's better to just ask someone and accept that you don't have the answer instead of spending hours looking at a book or something like that. Now it would be probably faster with ChatGPT, but nevertheless, the point is it's totally okay to not know something. And that was the first time I learned it, was in that really stressful situation in the hospital. And I wish that was something that could have been expressed better. And maybe it is expressed better in school, that you can rely on your colleagues, that you can rely on other disciplines more. But I think when you're new, it's that feeling of like, did I miss this day in school? Like, did I go get a drink of water while they were covering this? And you feel insecure internally. And I think that's the same thing that imposter syndrome comes from, is that feeling of, what if I don't know the answer to something? And the bottom line is you're not going to know the answer to everything. So be okay with that.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't think it's echoed completely in school these days from what we hear from students and interns who are feeling that imposter syndrome. That tip of yours, that it is okay to say that you're not sure, or you need to consult someone else to look it up. Everyone, dietitians, students, everyone should feel comfortable being able to do that. And then, like you said, slowly and with time, will still have imposter syndrome, but you will be able to
Yeah.
face it and approach it with a much more clear mind.
Yeah.
I love that. Fantastic. Great tips. Now we did have some questions submitted, so we're going to go to those now. They're a little more specific too. So
Sure.
if anyone has any questions, definitely drop them in the chat. We're going to get to them at the end of the session today. So these ones came from our audience. So someone here might have asked it. The first question is actually very common and super helpful for a lot of students and interns who are applying to jobs. So all eating disorder centers ask for experience, how to start as an entry-level RD or like an intern. That's
No, I totally get it. And that's weird that someone asked, maybe not weird, fortuitous that someone asked this question, because it's actually why I started Eating Disorders Boot Camp. It originally was called the class you didn't have in school. It was called Eating Disorders Boot Camp Training Workshop, the class you didn't have in school. It didn't become training workshop for professionals till later. So what happened as I was going along, giving these presentations, answering questions on the ADA listserv, and became sort of known as this expert who could explain eating disorders and practical, and not just repeat the diagnostic criteria, but actually teach dietitians what to do. I realized that maybe there was something I should be putting out there, as opposed to just waiting for someone to ask a question or give a talk. And at the same time I was thinking that, I spoke to the UT Southwestern class, dietitian class here in Dallas. And by the way, just tip, when you become a dietitian, take care of the students. The students are our future. So I always speak to students about eating disorders anytime anyone asks. I just did an interview yesterday on Zoom with someone, a student at Howard University, who may actually be on this call now. So I gave the talk afterwards. This exact question came up. How are we supposed to get experience without a job? How are we supposed to get a job without experience? And that's why I came up with Eating Disorders Boot Camp. It was going to be a certification course. And so what happened was, of course, it's not of course, what happened was 8 dietitians signed up, no students, because I think the students didn't really know what they didn't know, right? They were still waiting to get taught it in school. The dietitians were the ones who knew that we didn't get it in school, we need it. But Eating Disorders Boot Camp is very accessible for students, and it's known now in the field. So if you are applying for an eating disorder related job and you have Eating Disorders Boot Camp on your resume, that says something. My name is known. If it says Jessica Setnick's Eating Disorders Boot Camp on there, what that shows is that you have made the effort, that this is not just, oh, I'm applying for every job that's out there. This is what I really want to do. And I would encourage you to apply for jobs, even if you don't meet the exact criteria. Now, granted, it's hard sometimes to get through a screening process if all you have is your resume, but if you can try to find a phone number or an email and find someone, or through someone that find someone, or ask me, that knows someone at this place you're applying, that's always helpful, because then it's not just a matter of what's on paper, right? If the AI is screening out anyone who just graduated in 2024, right? You want to get past that part. And sometimes you need a personal contact for that. But once you get past that part, trust me that a lot of times an eating disorder facility does not want a very experienced dietitian. So no one would hire me to be a floor dietitian, because basically I would tell them everything they're doing wrong. I work as a consultant. That's what I do, right? So they want someone who is new, that they can sort of mold in their own protocol and teach the way that they do things in that facility. And so a lot of times they are happy to hire a new grad who has enthusiasm versus a dietitian who's, let's say, had a job for 5 years, but they worked in oncology and they're kind of like, well, I just really need a job, so maybe I'll try for this one at this eating disorder facility. So if you bring your positivity, your enthusiasm, the fact that this is your passion, that is totally appropriate. And you may even choose, if you want to disclose if you've had an eating disorder. Although if you do, you do need to make sure that you clarify where you are in your recovery, and that you're aware that, that's not necessarily a credential, but it's part of why you have a passion for this. So again, you kind of have to use your good judgment about if that's the appropriate thing to disclose. But also, if you sign up for my newsletter, I always send out free information about free webinars and educational events. And just because you're a student, you can always attend those things, even if they're for dietitians or therapists. And so you can list those on your resume, or you can say, in an interview that, I participate in as many eating disorder educational events as I can, because this is really my passion. And if you keep focusing on this is what you really want to do, that gives you a leg up from someone who really is just looking for a job.
Yeah. Fantastic. I feel like you covered all parts of that question there. And I think something to highlight too from that was the importance of networking and not being afraid to reach out to dietitians to ask questions, like you said, for the job posting, or to find someone who might know someone in a certain area. That's
Yeah. And I thought of something else actually, is that there is a website that I started a website that was a job search site for people looking for eating disorder jobs in the field. And thanks to some of the other sort of bigger search engines and job sites, it's not a financially successful job searching site. But what it is it has tons of advice from the experts. So that's eatingdisorderjobs.com. And there's a specific section on career resources. And in career resources is advice from the experts. And it's tons and tons of people who work in the eating disorder field from every type of discipline, therapists and dietitians. And there's even marketing people in the field, and they all give their advice for someone who's aspiring to work in the eating disorder field. So that would be really good reading for someone who is interested, because they recommend different books, they recommend different strategies. And I would love, even though it's not functioning as a job search website anymore, I'd still love for people to learn from those people that we interviewed.
Yes. And I did drop the link to that website in the chat for anyone looking at it, and then you can go to the advice from experts, and I'll drop the other link in later too. But yes, the importance of networking during that job search. And then there's also something I was going to touch on. Oh, I was also interested, for anyone who is on their computer, on their phone, and able to type in the chat, did you have eating disorder education in your nutrition curriculum? Yes or no? Interested to see.
And we've done a ton of research on that. So I started the International Federation of Eating Disorder Dietitians at some point, and you may be familiar with it, but it's ifed.org, and it's only $10 to join as a student. And we have a very active listserv where job postings are posted, dietitians answer questions. We really welcome students. And I would encourage you, we have local meetups sometimes where you can meet people in your area. So definitely consider joining IFED. And we've done research through IFED and shown that very few people have any education about eating disorders in dietitian school. There are a couple of places where you can have a whole course on eating disorders. A lot of times it's at the graduate level. And one of these studies that we did, we tried to get it published in the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics journal, and we got back a really snarky rejection that said this can't be right, because only 2 people said that they had a course in eating disorders before they were in grad school. And that can't be right, because there's at least a chapter on eating disorders in every nutrition textbook. And I just thought, wow. So you're thinking I think we asked them, when was your first encounter with working with a patient with an eating disorder? And so, only 2 people had experienced that, I guess. Anyway, my point is, it's pretty funny that, funny, not in a good way, that it's still not part of a part of nutrition education in school. And I always thought, I'm going to be put out of business one day. I mean, if the academy actually took eating disorders seriously, I would have no job anymore. I would happily go do crafts for a living or something. But basically, I've made a career out of filling in the gap for dietitians. So it's kind of unfortunate, but at the same time, maybe I'm the best person to do it. So when the academy actually wanted to do a book on eating disorders, this is an interesting story that not many people know. But go back to Eating Disorders Boot Camp for a minute. And it used to have a big manual that I would bring with me when I would teach it. And people would start calling and saying, because I did it like 40 times all over the US, people would say, my intern borrowed my Eating Disorders Boot Camp manual and didn't give it back. Can I have a new one? Or I carry that manual around all the time. Can I get a second one for my office? And I was thinking, okay, people carrying this 3-ring binder around, that's nuts. So we need a pocket guide. So I put a lot of the information into the Eating Disorders Clinical Pocket Guide. And then one day I got a call from an editor at the academy. And okay, again, this is going to sound so ancient, but there was a 1-800 number, maybe there still is, at the academy, where if you had a question, you could call, and they had librarians staffing this phone number, and the librarians would look up your question and answer it. And so this editor from the academy called and said, the librarians at the academy say they're referencing your book all the time, and they want to know why the academy doesn't have a book like this. So that's how I was then asked to write the academy pocket guide to eating disorders, just because. And I feel like people say, like, how do you get these opportunities? And one of the main ways I think you get opportunities is by doing a good job at everything you do. I'm not saying people will just call you on the phone and offer you things, but I think that's one part of it, is that some of it is just doing a really good job. And I also will say I'm good at marketing, but so that's part of it too. You can't just do a good job alone and never tell anyone, but doing a good job sometimes means that these opportunities come to you because you're doing it well. And so every talk, for example, is an advertisement for you doing future talks. Every book you write is an advertisement for you doing talks, that kind of thing. So I guess I'm not sure what got me on that topic, but just the idea that the academy really is not very eating disorder savvy, but I've sort of wedged myself in there, even though I don't know. I don't know what to say. I guess a lot of people are calling with questions about eating disorders. Why that wasn't a sign to add more courses on it, I don't know. But it was a sign that they needed a book on it. So at least that's something.
Yeah, it was clearly needed, and you were filling that gap. And I was actually looking at pretty much everyone said no, that they hadn't had. We had maybe one group session or one lecture, a little bit. And
Yeah.
this may even be more of the more students, interns now, because of all of the work over the past 2 decades that brought this topic more into curriculum or more necessary. And yeah, and I think a lot of people are more interested in it because it's more.
Well, I think people have been interested in it a long time, but the interns that I've had, a lot of them have said things like, I was discouraged from pursuing eating disorders as a career. I was told there's no role for dietitians, that you have to have lots of experience. It's not a new person job. I think this stuff is really the things that people who are in academia maybe say that aren't in the real world, because in the real world, we need lots more eating disorder dietitians. There's a huge role for dietitians in the treatment of eating disorders. As you said in my intro, that, I think dietitians often are leading the team. We're often telling doctors the things that they don't know about eating disorders. So there's a huge role for dietitians. And so again, that's why I started IFED, because the academy wasn't meeting our needs, and the eating disorder or professional organizations weren't meeting our needs. Like the academy didn't address eating disorders. The other eating disorder organizations didn't address dietitians. We needed our own organization, and we've gotten a lot accomplished through that. And so, yeah, it's just, I don't really understand. I guess everything just goes really slow. I really don't know what the reason is. No one's been able to give me a good explanation for why eating disorders is not a big part of the conversation in becoming a dietitian, because to me, it's not just eating disorders, it's eating behavior, it's the psychology of eating. It's sort of an umbrella over all eating as opposed to this little fringe thing. It's like every time we talk about nutrition therapy for oncology, nutrition therapy for dialysis, nutrition therapy for diabetes, nutrition therapy for kids, we should be talking about dysfunctional eating behaviors in all of that. And so my mind just does not understand why it's sort of this excluded thing. It's just this mistaken belief that eating disorders are so rare, and there's zero chance that there aren't people on this Zoom right now that have or have had eating disorders. The statistics just say that it's anyone who eats can have an eating disorder. And if everyone on this Zoom eats, that means at least 1 in 4, just by virtue of the statistics, probably has or has had an eating disorder. And so it's really important that we think of it as this big picture issue instead of this fringy thing. But that's why I try to talk about it whenever I can to dietitians, because there's so much interest. Because anyone who works in the field knows it doesn't matter if you work at MHMR, it doesn't matter if you work in food service. There's people with eating disorders, and maybe they're your coworkers, right? Maybe you don't even see patients, but we all need to have a working knowledge of what to do in those situations.
Yes. And even more echoes in the chat about trying to get that experience in the internship. Yeah, it's really incredible, but kudos to you for bridging that path in the beginning and being so impactful for 2 decades and continuing. It's
Just
really great.
stubbornness.
Yes. All right, so the next 2 questions were submitted, and they're a little more practice-based and counseling, which is interesting. So how to help someone who knows they need to eat to get better, but their ED voice is too strong for them to fight it.
Right. So I'm assuming that this is someone who's saying, as a dietitian, what do you do? Because if you're saying as a friend, what do you do? The goal as a friend is to get them professional help. So to say something like, and not at a meal, because a meal is a very sensitive time for someone with an eating problem, which if you've had one. So at a non-meal time, to say something like, I'm a little worried about you, and I wanted to find out if you notice these same things too. And if they do, then the goal is really just as a friend, you want to make sure they're getting help. And if they are, then they don't need to talk to you anymore about it if it's private, but you just want to know that they're getting help. And if they're not, then the key would be, is there any way that I could encourage you to meet with a counselor or a dietitian or speak with your doctor about it? Or I'd be happy to make some calls and see if I can find someone. Kind of normalizing getting professional help when you need it, when the skills you bring to the table aren't enough. When you are that professional, when you are that dietitian, and even if you're not in a eating disorder setting, but someone who, for example, you're counseling in any situation, and they seem to have these strong sort of fears or reasons that they don't want to eat appropriately, really practical tools are often your first approach, right? So it sounds like before you go to bed, you get hungry, but you feel like it's not safe to eat before you go to bed. So I'm wondering, what would it be like if you put a little snack by your bed so that would remind you that it is okay. Your dietitian said it's okay to have a snack before you go to bed, right? That very practical stuff to start. And we dietitians are great with ideas. The next step then is sort of like, well, I don't want to put a snack there because then I might eat it. Okay, well, then we have to kind of dig deeper into that. Okay, so that you need to eat to get better, but it sounds really scary to eat. Can you tell me a little more about that? And when you don't know what to say, tell me more is always a great thing, a great phrase to say. And you're trying to figure out basically if what they're saying about their fears, about their unwillingness to eat, is it really nutrition related or is it something else? Because food is a metaphor for a lot of things. And so someone who's feeling fearful about life or feeling out of control can also feel like food is something that they need to sort of control or be afraid of. And so if it's really not about the banana, let's say, if it's really about being afraid that unknown things are going to happen, that's something more for a counselor to help with. But if it's really about, well, but I heard bananas can make you gain weight if you eat them at breakfast. I don't know. I'm just making up something weird an influencer might say. Then you give them facts. But the key is you can't always solve eating issues with facts because they are also based on fears. So that's what we're separating as dietitians. What's about nutrition and what can I educate about versus what is actually something bigger. Like I'm just thinking of a patient I had who she would eat a whole bag of Valentine's candy at once. And she was like, I don't even know why I buy Valentine candy, but then when I do buy it, I eat it. And we talked about it. Can you tell me a little more about Valentine candy? And did you eat it when you were a kid? And she talked about how her dad would always treat her on Valentine's Day, and her dad was no longer living. And so when we realized that her eating a bag of Valentine candy was a way of trying to connect with her dad, then it became very clear that that's really a therapy topic, right? That I can give her all kinds of advice and ideas, but at the end of the day, if she doesn't have another way she feels like she can connect with her dad, then she's going to keep turning to Valentine candy for it. And so that's the kind of thing where we have to kind of keep working to uncover things as opposed to just giving information like, well, the serving size for Valentine's candy, I mean, that's not going to help anybody, right?
Yeah. Fantastic. And thank you for the little stories too. I think that helps other dietitians or students who are working with clients kind of visualize how to talk with them and questions to ask. So it's super helpful. And we have another question that's a little bit more about a group practice, how to deal with patients who don't like each other and compare, which leads to everyone in the group feeding off one another.
Oh, I love groups. Groups are so fun. And so in this situation, I feel like you have to use the power of the group, right? So first of all, you have a situation where if you're leading a group, hopefully at the beginning, and if you haven't, it's never too late to say, I want to set some ground rules for the group. Let's talk about what would make you feel safe in the group. And then you write some rules together. Maybe one of the rules is we don't compare what we eat to each other, or everyone keeps their eyes on their own plate, or when things get negative in the group, that's when I say time out and we all do a dance break for 60 seconds or whatever. But you come up with your ways of not letting something get out of control like that, because as the group leader, you are the one who gets to set the boundaries, and you're the one who gets to say, you know what, that seems like a topic that would be really important to talk about in individual therapy, or that's a topic that would be really important to talk about in our next individual session rather than in the group. And then you immediately go to a new topic. Like, you don't wait for person to agree with you, you just move on. And that's you setting boundaries. It's always easier to set boundaries when you've set expectations in advance. So if the expectation in the group is that we don't compare, then when that happens, other people in the group can even identify that and say, oh, comparing, right? And so you as the leader don't even have to step in. But I feel like doing sort of things like hand signals and like partner activities or just get up and shake it off type of stuff, that those kind of things help sort of reset the environment. And so the thing that I'm reading between the lines in this question is that the person who's asking this question feels a little bit futile, feels like nobody's listening to me, and so there's two parts to that. One is you can speak your truth. You can say, wow, it's interesting, I feel like no one in this group is listening to me. And what that makes me think is that everyone's eating disorder has kind of taken over, because I know that the healthy part of you wants to move forward, or you wouldn't even be in this group in the first place. But all I hear right now is eating disorder comparisons. I hear eating disorder competition. I hear eating disorder bitchiness. And, and I say that in a non-gendered way. So I'm just wondering, what do we need to do to counteract that? I say we all get up, do a dance break for 3 minutes. I'm going to put on whatever Taylor Swift song. And when we come back to the group, when we come back to the circle, let's all try to have a healthier, positive attitude about the rest of the way the rest of this group goes. Something like that, where you have to sort of take control back of the group, but B, the other part is that you're not futile. Like, speaking your truth is important, but then also, what is that part of you that feels like I'm inadequate to control this group, or maybe I'm not the right person to lead this group? You also want to talk with someone outside of the group, either your supervisor or a colleague or a more experienced dietitian or a therapist, and say, what do you do when a group seems to be getting out of control? How do you solve that kind of problem? Because I feel like I just kind of start feeling like I can't handle this, or I want to quit my job, or I need to tell my boss I don't want to do groups anymore, or I just want to smack everyone around, not literally, I get frustrated. How do I handle my response better to what's going on in the group? Because if you're internally feeling really flustered, it's hard to keep a group calm, because unfortunately, I think that any kind of, I don't know, unruly situation, I don't know if that's the right word, but like, I'm thinking of, a preschool right? Like once they sense that the leader is out of control, like it sort of gives everyone the freedom to completely go out of control. And so you do have to find a way to be the leader of the group. And I know that when I was first in the dietitian work, like working person, I was maybe 25, and some of my patients were not that far from my age, and they were teens, but still I felt pretty much like a teen myself. And I would sometimes feel like I kind of lost control of my groups. And I talked to my attending about it, and he said, well, the first thing is I think you should stop referring to them as the girls. At that time they were mostly girls, I guess. And he said, I think you should think of them as your patients, and that will remind you that you're the authority figure in the room. And that helped me a lot. And I still to this day call my patients patients. Some people say clients, whatever you want to say is fine. But for me, I always said patients, because that's what helped me remember, oh, right. Even if I don't want to, I have to be the one that says this isn't a good topic for this conversation or whatever. I have to be the one to set the boundaries, like it or not.
Yeah.
And
So
maybe someone will not like me because I set that boundary. But as many people get annoyed that you set a boundary, there's equal number of people who are like, thank God she set a boundary.
yeah. So a little bit of self-work potentially, a little bit of remembering that you are that authority figure and you're the group leader, and setting, I like your point of setting expectations so that boundaries.
Yeah, and all groups should have those kind of expectations. Like everything we talk about is confidential, whatever it is. We don't meet with people that are in this group outside of the group. If you see someone outside of the group later today, you don't mention things that were talked about in the group when you see them later, that kind of stuff. And then you just review those things every single beginning of every group. So if they're new people, they learn what the rules are. And so it doesn't mean that people aren't going to be bitchy or compare or compete outside of your group, but at least you've made your group a safe place for what your expectations are.
Yes. Okay, we have two more questions. So if I've had an eating disorder, does that mean I can't work in this field? So someone, a student or a dietitian who has
Yeah.
had one, and does that mean that they cannot work in the eating disorder field?
Doesn't mean that at all. What it means is that you have to take extra good care of yourself and be aware that talking to people about eating all day can influence your eating. If you go into any dietitian job having had an eating disorder and saying, well, it's not going to affect me because that's other people. Well, that is just called denial. You have to recognize that sometimes after talking all day, you don't really feel like eating, or talking about food all day, or that you might be tired at the end of the day, or if you work in an area where, let's say, lots of the people are underweight, you might start to question your own body size. You might compare. All of these things are totally normal, but you have to nip them in the bud in the sense of recognizing this is how it's affecting me, and not let it get to the point of actually affecting your eating. And if it does start affecting your eating, then you need to be sure that you're talking to the right person, whether it's a dietitian or a therapist of your own, so that you can keep that separate, because it's really important that we keep our own eating stuff out of our patient care. So just as an example, if someone went to see their therapist and their therapist said, well, you should probably eat cheese 9 times a day because that's what I do, like we can all recognize that that's not appropriate. And so it would be the same way the other way, right? If a patient came in and said, I eat cheese 9 times a day, and the therapist thought, oh, I should probably eat cheese 9 times a day, right? We can see that those two things are very separate. But as dietitians, we're talking about food all the time, but it's still the same principle. Whatever you're teaching your patients isn't necessarily right for you, and whatever you're doing for you isn't necessarily right for your patients. And you have to keep those two things separate. And a lot of times it's just important for you to have your own space to talk about your own eating and how your job is affecting your eating. That's totally separate, so you're not accidentally blurring the line between your eating and what's best for your patients.
Yes, super important. And I think a lot of people here could probably take that advice and relate to it. And then one last piece of advice, if you had some advice for a dietitian looking to get their CEDRD certification, what would that be?
Okay, sure. So first thing I would tell them is it's now called the CEDS certification. So it's not separate for dietitians and therapists and doctors. Everyone gets the same CEDS. And then the next thing I would say is you have to have a job working in the eating disorder field to be able to pursue the certification. So there are courses, but you're not really going to learn a lot from the courses. It's really more about during the 2 years of work that every month you have a supervision session or consultation session with a certified consultant. So someone who's been certified by IADEP, the organization, not IFED, keep those two things separate, but IDEP to do these consultations, and once a month for 2 years. And then after 2 years, if you've accumulated the right number of hours of patient care and you've done your supervision sessions, then you can apply to take the exam to be certified. So it's really not something you can do in advance in order to say, like, I have the CEDS and that's a credential for applying for a job. It's something you work on as you're working. And so the good thing about it is that you don't have to you don't have to announce, I'm starting work on my CEDS. You don't have to start the clock like that. The clock starts the first day you have a consultation session with a certified consultant. So if you are already working in the eating disorder field and you're thinking at some point in the future you might want to get your CEDS, I would say find a consultant right now, have a meeting, because that's how the clock starts on accumulating your 2,500 patient care hours.
Amazing. Fantastic advice. That's so easy for you to say that to everyone and for them to learn versus trying to Google and figure it out. So super important. Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna go for another 5 minutes or so, but if for some people I know some people are joining in the middle there. So I just wanted to share about the Eating Disorders Bootcamp again. So it's absolutely incredible course. Like Jessica said, she created it to fill that gap and has filled that gap for 2 decades and served thousands of dietitians. And so she does have a very special offer for our community right now. And I'll drop the link to the Eating Disorders Bootcamp in the chat. And the code that you can use for another $40 off is all access. And then, of course, keeping in touch with Jessica, getting updates on any upcoming events that she's doing, any helpful webinars. Like she said, she mentions free trainings and giveaways in her newsletter. We'll drop her newsletter in the chat there.
Will you put ifed.org in there too? It's ifedd.org.
Oh, that one is not linked. We'll have these in the replay email as well for everyone to look at. And then also to keep in touch with Jessica, her Instagram and her LinkedIn. And then for anyone who's on here, actually, I'm curious, does anyone have so actually Brent had a question about the course, if you want to talk about the course real quick, more important.
Happy to. So the Eating Disorders Bootcamp is all hosted online, so you can download it and to your device, or you can stream it. It is 8 modules of the original Eating Disorders Bootcamp, and that covers everything about nutrition counseling for eating disorders. Then we've got, and medical complications as well. And then we have Advanced Eating Disorders Bootcamp, which is not me. That is 3 other professionals talking about their areas and how they interlock with eating disorders. So addictions, obsessive compulsive disorder, and cognitive behavioral therapy, and talking about those and eating disorders. And then Eating Disorders Bootcamp Next Generation is, I think, 8 more hours of me giving more advanced training on eating disorder nutrition counseling. So, and there's also an hour, I think, of videos of me mock counseling my summer interns as if they were individuals. They each pretend to be kind of an individual with a different type of eating issue. And so we talk through that and some of the sticky situations that people experience.
Yes.
And then there's an add-on, if you want to, you can add on the 2 eating disorders pocket guides.
Yes, such valuable experience. Like, so that the pocket guides are great to carry around, especially if you're maybe doing a rotation or starting a job or currently working as an eating disorder dietitian. Super helpful to have. You got all of those requests for the smaller one anyway, so we know it's very needed, and all of the information in the boot camp is so helpful and super great for people who may not have that school experience too, or had that minimal school experience, as most of us have that minimal experience. And then we actually have a question from Ella. As someone who has a long way to go in school, only 2nd year, and just applied to transfer into dietetics, congratulations, welcome to the dietetics world. Do you have any advice on how to start getting involved in the eating disorders field?
Sure. So I would say IFED is a great opportunity because it's, you connect with people that are all online, but we can point you to resources in your community. So IFED is a great option. It depends on if you're in sort of a bigger metropolitan area, whether we have a local group, but there's definitely things going on that are online. I would say the fact that you have an interest in it, it's already going to start, like things will start popping up to you, right? So definitely things like you want to sign up for the mailing list, the emailing list of any of the eating disorder treatment facilities in your area, because that's how you'll get notified of their events. Sometimes eating disorder facilities do in-person events, and they are always happy to meet future professionals. I'm trying to think what else. I think just don't expect your schooling to provide you with what you're looking for with eating disorders, and just know that it's still out there. It's just not going to come to you.
Yes. And actually, yeah, she's at the University of Florida, so populated city, so lots of good resources that
Okay, and Adi, I know that Adi is on the Zoom and she's in charge of the IFED local group, so she will know. So yeah, absolutely. We would love to have you.
Amazing. And we'll do one more question
Okay.
before we close off, if anyone has a question. I know you had a really nice note from Stephanie about the boot camp.
Thanks, Stephanie.
See if anyone has a question.
I'm trying to think if there was anything else. Oh, you know what? Go to jessicasetnick.com, because there's a ton of free resources there. There's podcasts that I've been on that you can watch or listen to. There are free handouts you can download for patient education. There, oh, just tons of stuff that doesn't cost anything. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Everyone here obviously gathered so much from you, and you shared so much and like little tidbits and stories. It was so helpful and so inspirational too for people that just don't know how to break into the field, but have that passion and really want to help people.
Because we need you. We
Yeah.
need you. Do not let anyone discourage you. Follow your dream.
Yes. All right. Thank you all for being here. We'll send out the recording tomorrow. And again, thank you, Jessica. Great conversation. Getting a lot of thank yous in the chat. So thank you so much. It was so valuable. All right. Bye.